This is the easier-to-read version of 1984 by George Orwell, retold and narrated by Sarah Simpson. Part 3, Chapter 6. Winston was surprised when, instead of shooting him in the head, O'Brien let him go. "You are no longer a danger to the party," he said. His life was different after his time in the Ministry of Love. He had a new job with much better pay and much shorter hours. Once a week, he met with some other people for a few hours to decide something about how to use commas for the next edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. It wasn't a real job. It was just something the party did with people after they had been in the Ministry of Love. The truth was that Winston's mind was too confused and damaged after what had happened to do any kind of real work. On most days, Winston slept late until 11 o'clock. By 3, he was sitting at his personal table at a bar called the Chestnut Tree. He drank gin and worked to solve the daily chess game problem in the newspaper for the next 7 hours. The gin tasted just as bad as it always had, but Winston needed to drink to get through the days and nights since his release. When he woke up in the morning, the first thing he did was drink a cup of gin that he had laid out the night before. Otherwise, he couldn't get up. Only the gin kept his mind from coming up with evil, false memories about things like being tortured or a cage near his face full of rats. Winston was watching the telescreen in the bar closely. Oceania was at war with Eurasia. They had always been at war with Eurasia. A very important battle was going on, and today would be the day everyone found out who would win. If they lost control of northern Africa, Eurasia would be able to take over Oceania next. The results of this would be very bad for Oceania. It might even lead to the end of Oceania and the destruction of the party. As soon as Winston found his mind thinking these thoughts, he stopped himself. "Crime stop," he thought. "No negative thoughts about Oceania or the party. The party will live forever. Long live Big Brother." Every time Winston's gin glass was empty, the waiter came and filled it up again. They knew that Winston would drink all afternoon, so they didn't ask if he wanted a refill any more. As he sat at the bar, Winston had a sudden memory from when he was a little boy. He was about 10 years old. It was a couple of months before his mother and sister disappeared. It was a rainy day. He was hungry and whiny as usual. He had been kicking the wall because he was bored, and the neighbors were getting angry. His mother told him if he could be good, she would go buy him a toy. She ran out in the rain and came back a little later with a little homemade board game. It was obvious that it was very cheap. Someone had made it out of paper and wood scraps they found, and Winston pouted. He was hoping for something better, like a metal car. But Winston's mother lit a candle. She laid out the board game and played it with him. They played 8 times. They smiled and laughed. They forgot how hungry they were. It had been one of the best days of Winston's life. Except it wasn't one of the best days of my life, Winston thought. That didn't really happen. It's just another false memory. I should ignore it. This happened to Winston sometimes. He would remember things that weren't real. He knew they weren't real because the party hadn't told him about these events. That meant he'd made them up. On the table where he sat at the bar, Winston used his finger to write in the dust, 2 + 2 = 5. Julia had told him that the party couldn't get inside your head. They couldn't control what you thought or what you felt. She had been wrong. They had gotten inside of Winston's mind and changed it. They had used drugs and torture to take away the parts of him they didn't like, and he would never get those parts of himself back. Winston had seen Julia 1 time since he was released. It was just a coincidence that they saw one another. It wasn't planned. It was a very cold day in early March. Winston was walking through the park, and he saw her. He almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked different. She had gained weight, but more than that, her eyes looked flat and dead. He knew that there would be microphones listening, but it didn't matter. No one cared what he did anymore. They knew he was broken and could never hurt the party again. He went to Julia and put his arm around her waist. It didn't feel the same. He didn't enjoy it, and neither did she. They walked together for a while, not saying anything. Finally, Winston spoke. "I betrayed you," he said. I betrayed you, Julia replied. She looked at him. There was no love in her eyes. There was no happiness. There was nothing. When they torture you, they do awful things to you, she said. They do things to you that you can't stand up to. You'll do anything to make them stop. You're so scared that you'll betray anyone. You'll say, do it to this other person, just don't do it to me. Later you tell yourself that you didn't mean it, but you know that you did. When it was happening, you meant it. You would let the person you said you loved suffer if it meant you could save yourself. After that, you don't feel the same way about the person anymore. Winston nodded. Everything she said was true. All you care about is yourself, she said. All you care about is yourself, Winston repeated. And you don't feel the same way about the other person anymore. Julia nodded. I need to catch my train, she said. We should meet again, Winston said, but he didn't mean it. He didn't actually care if he saw her again. We should, Julia said, also not meaning it. Winston was going to walk her to the train station, but she sped up so he couldn't keep up. After a while, he just stopped, turned around, and went home. He didn't really want to follow her anyway. There was nothing left between them. At the bar, the music on the telescreen changed. That meant they were getting ready to make a big announcement. It had to be the results of the battle against Eurasia. Winston wondered if Oceania was going to be destroyed. The sound of trumpets blasted out of the telescreen. That meant there was good news. A news anchor came on. In a last-minute victory, Oceania won the Battle of Africa against Eurasia today. Oceania is now in control of the entire African continent. It is a happy day for everyone. Oceania had won. Winston felt a strange emotion instead of happiness. What was it? Disappointment? Surely not. Winston drank another glass of gin and allowed his mind to drift to a happy dream. He was back in the Ministry of Love. The guard was taking him out into the bright hallway. He felt a gun press into the back of his head and a bullet enter his brain. In those final seconds, all Winston could see was the huge face of Big Brother, looking down on him and smiling. Tears ran down Winston's cheek. He had finally won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother.